She didn't care if the ticket was valid. She didn't even read it. To her, he was wrong from the moment she laid eyes on him. Wrong skin, wrong seat, wrong story. He had just stepped onto Flight 227, still wearing the uniform that had crossed 3 borders in 2 wars. Seat 3A, first class, paid in full, but that didn't matter. Not when you're a young black soldier and the woman standing in front of you wears a flight attendant badge and centuries of silent judgment stitched into her smile. "Sir, I'll need to see your ticket." He handed it to her, calm, polite. She didn't thank him, didn't scan it, didn't even look at the name. Just a pause, a breath, then, "I think you're in the wrong seat." And just like that, 9 months of service erased by one glance. Let me take you back to the moment it all started. And before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching this video from? Make sure to follow so we can bring you more powerful videos. The first-class cabin smelled of leather, linen, and quiet wealth. Muted lights, white wine already pouring. Laughter, polite and distant, floated between seats like perfume. Marcus Ellison stepped in, boots polished, uniform crisp. There was nothing loud about him, but he drew attention anyway. Not because of noise, because of presence. At 29, Marcus had already seen more than most would in a lifetime. Cities turned to rubble, villages reborn, orders followed without flinching. He wore that history on his posture, on the calm set of his jaw. He moved like a soldier taught to take up as little space as possible. And he carried something most passengers didn't, a reason to deserve this seat. Seat 3A, window side. His mother had booked it, Colonel Deborah Ellison, one of the highest-ranking women in Joint Operations Command. But he didn't sit like someone who had influence behind him. He sat like someone who hoped today wouldn't be the day. Across the aisle, a man folded his newspaper tighter. Behind him, a woman placed her Chanel tote between her and the armrest, subtle but unmistakable. Then came the click. Heels, sharp, fast, unapologetic. Madeline Shaw, mid-40s, flawless in appearance, hair in a tight French twist, not a strand out of place. Lipstick the color of power meetings and divorce court. She had been flying for 19 years. She could balance 2 trays in turbulence and spot a fake upgrade from 10 rows away. She also had a habit, a dangerous one. She read people before she read tickets. Black man, military haircut, alone carrying his own bag, no ring. She had already written his story, probably used someone else's miles, maybe a last-minute upgrade, or just wandered into the wrong section, by mistake or not. She didn't stop to wonder where he was coming from. Didn't ask what the uniform meant. To Madeline Shaw, all black men looked the same at 30,000 feet. Suspect. She stopped beside him, clipboard tight in hand. "Sir, may I see your ticket?" Not rude, but not friendly. Professional, in the way a closed door is professional. Marcus looked up, gaze steady, tired. "Yes, ma'am." He handed her the paper. She glanced at it like it might bite him. Her eyes didn't move much, barely scanned. This is for first class?" Marcus nodded. 3A. She didn't move, just stood there, processing something not written on the page. Then she turned on her heel and walked off, fast, as if urgency alone could prove she was right. Marcus sat there, still. He could feel it, the crack in the atmosphere. Passengers began watching without watching. She returned in less than a minute. No smile now. "I'll need you to move to economy, sir. Your seat appears to be incorrect." No explanation, no apology, just authority, served cold. Marcus blinked once. "I believe this is my assigned seat." Her face didn't change, but her voice did, just slightly. Sir, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I can call security if you prefer." There it was, the truth behind the politeness, the muscle behind the manners. The air inside the cabin seemed to pull tight around him, like a belt cinched too fast. The woman across the aisle adjusted her seatbelt. The man behind him turned away, but not before unlocking his phone. Marcus felt it all, the heat under his collar, the weight in his throat. But he didn't shout. He didn't ask why. He just stood up. Not because he was wrong, because he had learned long ago what happens when you're right. But black. and alone. Marcus stood, not fast, not slow, just enough to feel the fabric of the moment tear beneath him. He reached down for his bag, fingers brushing against the leather strap that had traveled with him through air bases, checkpoints, heat waves in Kabul. The same strap now dragged along polished flooring, too soft for someone like him. He stepped out of row 3, and the silence followed. Not a word was said, but the silence had texture, like velvet stretched too tight across a bruise. A man in a blazer avoided his eyes. A woman shifted her scarf as if his presence had altered the temperature. Another passenger coughed, loud, nervous, not because of illness, just because he didn't know what else to do. Marcus walked the aisle slowly, not out of shame, but because this was the kind of humiliation that deserved to be felt one step at a time. Row 19, economy. The seat was narrow, cloth frayed at the edges, tray tables scratched by years of elbows and plastic forks. A dried piece of gum stuck to the back of the magazine pouch. Marcus sat down. The space around him tightened like a vice. The cabin air, once cool and clean, now tasted recycled, thick with the breath of indifference. He adjusted his posture, back straight, shoulders square, and then he reached for his phone. Not to vent, not to rage, but to tell the truth to someone who would understand it without translation. Text to mom. They said I don't belong, I didn't argue. They even threatened to call security. He stared at the screen, didn't hit send yet. His thumb hovered. The message flickered like a pulse, something half alive in his hand. He wasn't just reporting an incident, he was opening a wound that had no name, because it had been reopened so many times it no longer bled, just ached. He looked out the window. Nothing but wing and white sky. The irony twisted in his chest. Out there, he had defended freedom. In here, he was being told where he did and didn't belong. A baby cried in the back. Someone laughed 2 rows ahead. Life moved on, and yet, in seat 19C, a soldier sat in the silence, learning again what it cost to be dignified in a world that confuses skin with status. He hit send. Colonel Deborah Ellison stood at the edge of a wide window, phone pressed to her ear. Her stare didn't blink. Her breath didn't stutter. Only her hand moved, reaching for a black file marked with gold letters. Federal Aviation Advisory Committee, DoD Liaison. She had served 3 administrations, drafted protocols for threat response in foreign airspace, testified before Congress on airline security. But right now, none of that mattered, because her son had just texted her one sentence, and it was enough to trigger a storm. They said I don't belong, I didn't argue. They even threatened to call security. Within minutes, a secure line opened. The message traveled fast, faster than turbulence. From her office in Arlington to a contact at the FAA. From the FAA to the airline's corporate liaison. And finally, like thunder rolling beneath a cloudless sky, into the cockpit of Flight 227. Captain Jeremy Lorne blinked as the co-pilot passed him a folded slip of paper. No words, just the weight of authority. He read it once, then again. A single line stood out, bold and final. Passenger Marcus Ellison, son of Colonel Deborah Ellison. Possible discrimination incident. Respond immediately. The captain exhaled, slow. He'd flown 30 years. He'd seen things unravel fast at 36,000 feet. But this was different. He pressed the intercom. Madeline Shaw to the flight deck, please. Ms. Shaw immediately. Madeline straightened her blouse, tucked a stray hair behind her ear, and walked with precision. Her smile had returned. Professional, practiced. She wasn't worried, not really. She thought this was about catering or turbulence or some minor seat dispute. But as she stepped into the cockpit, she saw the captain's face. No smile, no welcome, just the kind of look that says, "You've made the wrong kind of headline." "Madeline," he said, voice low, "we have a situation." She raised an eyebrow. If this is about the man in 3A, I simply followed protocol. His demeanor seemed questionable. I was protecting the cabin environment. Did you verify his ID? Well, no, but did you check anyone else's ticket in first class? No, but I had a feeling. A feeling. He slid the message toward her. She read it. Her lips parted. That can't be. It is. Silence. You're going to walk back to row 19, the captain said, each word clean as a scalpel. You're going to apologize, publicly, and you're going to return him to his seat, now. Madeline swallowed, her throat burned. Is that really necessary? You humiliated the son of a senior defense official on a federal carrier without cause. But this isn't about what you felt. It's about what you did. He turned back to the controls. Fix it. Madeline turned, heels softer now, shoulders lower. She wasn't walking through a cabin anymore. She was walking through the wreckage of her own assumptions. Madeline stood just behind row 19. Her smile was gone. What remained was something less polished, less trained. A tight line of lips, a clipboard clenched to the chest like a shield. Her heels, now silent on the aisle carpet, paused inches from Marcus's seat. He didn't look up right away. He was staring out the window, watching nothing. Just white sky and the edge of the engine blade turning like time. Madeline cleared her throat, just loud enough for the surrounding rows to tune in. Lieutenant Ellison, she began, voice low but carrying. I want to apologize for the earlier misunderstanding. Marcus turned, slowly. The passengers around him weren't eating anymore. Phones tilted, eyes sharpened, pretending to look away but listening harder than ever. Madeline's hands tightened around the clipboard. Her eyes blinked faster than her words. I misread the situation and made assumptions that were unfair. You had every right to that seat, and I'm sorry. She hesitated. Marcus didn't interrupt. He let the silence sit, heavy as it deserved. Then, calm as breath, you didn't check anyone else's ticket. You touched me. It wasn't a question. Not really, more like an indictment dressed in decency. Madeline blinked. Her throat worked, but no words came. She nodded once, barely, and stepped aside. Marcus stood. There was no triumph in his movement, no anger in his face, only a kind of quiet that dared the world to speak first. He picked up his duffel bag, walked past her. Each step back down the aisle was a march, not toward comfort, but toward reclamation. Seat 3A was still there, unoccupied, like it had been holding its breath for his return. Marcus sat, window to his left, silence to his right. Pride, not loud, but unshaken, pressed into the crease of his shoulders. A man across the aisle, late 50s, navy blazer, cleared his throat. I'm sure she didn't mean anything by it. Sometimes these things. Marcus turned, eyes steady, voice soft but sharp enough to cut through altitude. When it happened and nobody spoke, I mattered only when I became a problem. The man looked away. Fast. Outside the window, clouds rolled like slow applause. And inside, Marcus leaned back. Not because he was comfortable, but because he finally took back the space they told him he didn't deserve. The plane touched down with a soft thud, not dramatic, just final, like a period at the end of a sentence no one wanted to write. Flaps open, wheels hissed. Outside the oval windows, 3 figures waited near the jet bridge. One in a navy suit, clipboard in hand, one in a yellow safety vest, standing too straight to be ground crew, and the third, airport security, arms folded, jaw clenched. Inside the cabin, the fastened seatbelt sign blinked off with a ding, but no one moved. Not yet. Then a chime. Flight attendants, disarmed doors, and cross-check. Passengers rose, bags unzipped. But tension lingered, thicker than in the scent of cabin air and recycled apologies. Marcus remained seated, back straight, hands resting gently on his thighs, his seatbelt still buckled. He didn't need to rush. They were already coming to him. A uniformed staff member stepped into the doorway, leaned toward the nearest crew member, and whispered something short. Madeline's jaw stiffened. She turned as 2 men approached, one from the airline, the other from airport security. Their steps were slow, deliberate, like they had rehearsed this. Ms. Shaw, the airline rep, said evenly, "We'll need a moment of your time. Please bring your things and step off the aircraft." Her face paled, but she nodded. No fight, no questions. The moment passed like a breath caught in the chest. She walked down the aisle she once owned, and now barely recognized. Her heels didn't click this time. They barely touched the floor. Marcus stepped out last. A quiet nod from the flight staff. A polite gesture from the man in the Navy suit. "Sir, this way, please. The lounge is expecting you." They moved through the terminal like ghosts. Eyes followed but didn't linger. No camera crews. Not yet. But something was coming. A storm still building behind closed lips. Soft lighting, mahogany paneling. The hush of corporate luxury. And at the center of it, his mother. Colonel Deborah Ellison stood tall in a charcoal gray suit, her posture straight as steel. But when she saw Marcus walk through the door, something shifted. Slightly. Briefly. "You okay?" she asked, voice steady but low. He nodded once. "I didn't yell," he said. "Didn't even stand up fast." A pause. "You shouldn't have had to do either." They sat. No small talk. No long embrace. Just truth. "They're already crafting a statement," she said. "It's vague, half sincere, mostly designed to make it go away." Marcus looked down at his hands. "I don't want attention." "Good," she said, her voice cooling, "because this isn't about attention." She leaned forward. "This is about memory, about who gets to decide what's normal and what happens when you stay quiet too long." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every word landed like a stone in still water. The footage wasn't sharp, grainy, handheld, shaky from turbulence, but it didn't need to be perfect, just real. A phone camera, tilted slightly sideways, caught the exact moment she leaned in and said, "I can call security if you prefer." The internet did the rest. Within hours, the clip had spread, shared, reposted, dissected. It showed no raised voices, no outbursts, just a uniformed man, quiet and still, being asked to leave a seat he paid for. And a woman in heels wielding authority like a blade she'd used before. But it didn't stop there. The airline, under pressure, launched a full internal investigation. Not for justice, for damage control. They reviewed cabin footage from the last 18 months, pulled data, matched complaints, and a pattern emerged. Passenger profiles, flight logs, tiny details that formed something much larger. Again and again, her name appeared, Madeline Shaw. Each time the same rhythm, disputes in first class, black passengers, soft accusations, hard silence. Some had filed reports. Most hadn't, because what's the point when the system is designed to forget? But now it couldn't look away. Madeline was terminated. No ceremony, no statement, just an email sent at 9:42 a.m. and a login screen that no longer worked. Across town, in a quiet office tucked above a parking garage, two people sat across from each other. Marcus, in a dark blue pullover. His mother still in uniform, though the collar was slightly loosened. A legal pad between them. Two pens. And a printed draft titled Proposal for Passenger Equity and Accountability Protocol. Preliminary Framework. They weren't writing revenge. They were building reform. Policies that required implicit bias training, mandatory verification audits, standardized escalation procedures, because the next Marcus Ellison might not have a colonel for a mother, and he shouldn't need one. Marcus paused at one paragraph, his pen stilled. "I don't want this to become about me." His mother didn't look up, just nodded. "Then write it like it's about all the ones who didn't speak." Outside the window, dust began folding over the city. Inside, their pens moved like something sacred, etching new rules where silence used to live. The room wasn't grand. No flags flanking the walls, no marble columns, just a folding table, two microphones, and rows of folding chairs, most already filled. Camera lights warmed the air, making everything shimmer slightly. Not dramatic, just real. A podium with a printed sign, Veterans for Equity, National Press Response. Marcus stood behind it. No uniform. No stage presence. Just a fitted navy sweater, sleeves pushed halfway up. Palms pressed to the sides of the podium like they were anchoring him. To his right sat three men and one woman, all veterans. Old ribbons pinned to old jackets, eyes tired, but alert. They didn't nod. They didn't smile. They just waited. He took a breath, not the kind you take to steady your voice, the kind you take when you know there's no going back. I'm not here to shame anyone, Marcus began. His voice was calm, smooth, but with something deeper underneath, like stones resting in river water. I'm here because I was told I didn't belong, and I know I'm not alone. A few camera shutters clicked. He looked up, not at anyone in particular, but as if speaking to someone who hadn't arrived yet. The version of himself who once sat quietly and took it. The kid who got followed around the department store. The private who got second-guessed at the gate. This isn't just about a seat. It's about how fast someone can look at you and decide you're out of place. No matter what you've done, no matter who you are. He paused. Let the silence breathe. You don't have to wear a uniform to deserve respect. You don't need a rank to be treated like a person. The woman beside him blinked hard. Nah. A reporter near the back lowered her phone. I've been asked, why didn't you yell? Why didn't you make a scene? He gave a faint smile, half tired, half bulletproof. Because dignity doesn't yell. It just stands up. His hands dropped from the podium. He leaned in slightly. And this isn't just about me. It's about the mother who's told to calm down when she asked a question. The kid pulled aside just to be sure. The man who pays for a seat and is still told, show me your proof. He nodded once, more to himself than the room. This story went viral, but this pattern's been here a long time. We're just finally calling it by its name. He stepped back, no dramatic closer, no rehearsed tagline, just that look in his eyes. The look of someone who stopped waiting for permission to belong. And somewhere across the country, on buses, in barbershops, in back rows of classrooms, in corners of break rooms, people listened. The headlines changed first. Airline announces bias response audit. New passenger equity measures proposed for 2026. Military advocacy groups call for reform in airline protocols. It didn't happen overnight, but change rarely does. It's the drip, not the flood. The quiet rewiring of systems built to forget. One by one, airlines issued updated training modules. Some added anonymous reporting channels. Others mandated bias awareness seminars for all first-class crew. Not everyone believed it would stick, but it was a start. And when Marcus's name came up, because it always came up, offers followed. Talk shows, endorsement deals, book contracts. One airline even proposed a campaign, a new face of first class. He turned it all down. Not out of anger, but because he knew the moment you become a symbol, they stop listening to your words and start branding your silence. He didn't want to be famous. He just wanted to sit in his seat and not be touched. But still, the world found him. A retired nurse wrote him a letter on yellowed stationery, thanking him for saying what she couldn't, back in 1983 when she was told to wait by the bathroom while others boarded. A middle schooler from Cleveland emailed, my teacher showed your speech. I'm not scared to speak up now. A woman stopped him at a gas station, hand on her heart. Didn't ask for a photo, just whispered, you made me feel seen. Marcus always smiled, nodded, thanked them, and kept moving. He wasn't looking to be a hero. He just wanted people to remember that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand up without raising your voice and mean every quiet word you say. Washington, D.C. The marble walls of the National Aviation Policy Forum stood cold and polished, the kind of place where change walks slowly but dressed well. Marcus stood behind a wide podium, this time in a tailored suit, dark charcoal, no insignia on his chest, no uniform, no need. His voice, calm as ever, cut through the formal hush of the room. I've heard people say, let's be better, let's do better, but better doesn't come from slogans. It comes from systems that remember, and people who refuse to forget. He looked around, lobbyists, pilots, reporters, senators, and somewhere in the back, young interns taking notes like the future depended on it. Dignity cannot be given, he said. It's not a policy line, not a bullet point. He paused, then let the weight of the next sentence settle in the room before he said it. Power can be granted, but dignity must be recognized. And if you don't see it in someone, then the problem isn't them, it's you. No applause cue, no dramatic gesture, just quiet. And then a slow rising sound like something sacred had just been spoken aloud. He still flies. Not always first class, not always noticed, no name tags, no speeches, no entourage. Sometimes he's just a man in row 14A, earbuds in, reading a book with the window cracked open to sky. But the difference now is he no longer shrinks. He boards every flight knowing the world is watching a little more closely, not because of who he is, but because of what he refused to become. Not a symbol, not a slogan, just a reminder that sometimes it only takes one quiet man in a stolen seat to return it to all of us.